Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with the new fanfic. And if you enjoy the fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic.
What if Naruto changed Sakura's destiny before the marriage happened? Chapter 1. A Marriage, with my daughter. Sasuke watched, his calloused right hand resting casually, yet alert on his sword Kusanagi that was tied to his waist as he watched his king, Madara, negotiate with the Haruno clan head. Yes, a show of political alliance. Madara confirmed. Madara had jet black hair, long and unruly, and wore an elaborate red armor that included arm guards, and a chest plate, with armored plates that extended down the front, sides and back down to his knees. His face was serious, almost ruthless, his charcoal eyes cold and menacing. You think that by marriage, it will automatically gain the loyalty of our people? Kazashi challenged, as if the thought of it was ridiculous. Sasuke watched as the Haruno clan head held his hands in fists, a displeased frown on his face, his eyebrows furrowed as he stood in challenge to the Uchiha. The man was odd, with dull pink hair, wearing white clothes that were covered by a bright red set of armor, though his was much less elaborate than the Uchiha king, his consisting of a red chest plate, with red arm guards and red shin guards. If you are to be guaranteed that the wrath of the Uchiha do not wipe out your very existence, yes. Madara sneered. I don't see how you have any options of refusal. Kazashi gritted his teeth. No, I suppose not. I guess I should not have been so naive to think that the Uchiha would not invade the free clans and force us under your rule. Kazashi concluded bitterly. You all have been left unchecked for too long. What good are you, if you are not under the control of a powerful clan that can guide you? Offer you the way to live your lives. Madara countered. Sasuke watched as this only irritated the pink-haired man even more, yet he knew that he had to have been feeling helpless in his predicament. No harm is to come to my daughter. Kazashi bartered, though his tone held skepticism, and if Madara noticed it, he had chosen to ignore it. So long as she obeys our wishes. Madara sneered. Kazashi had nothing further to say as he turned his heel to leave, not giving the king any bow of respect. In irritation, Sasuke grabbed his sword at the thought of someone disrespecting his king in such a way, though Madara motioned for him to stop as they watched his retreating form. Watch your anger, Sasuke. Madara began. His insolence won't matter by tomorrow morning anyway. Sasuke frowned. What did he mean by that? However, Sasuke dared not bother to ask. He didn't need to. All he cared about was doing what Madara instructed him to do. Sakura, Kazashi called as he entered their home. Though the head of their clan, the Harunos were modest people. They didn't live in fancy houses, or have much for riches as they were a clan who lived off the land and of their own free will. Their house was quaint, small in a sense, but a beautiful home. The place where Sakura had lived her whole of 18 years. Father, I've been worried. Sakura ran to her father, embracing him in a hug. She had been worried about him ever since the Uchiha had demanded he meet with the clan head. It had happened so suddenly. They had invaded their territory in the night, scaring their people into thinking that they were here to take their land and lives. Sakura, we need to talk. Come, and sit down. Kazashi said, as he gave an uncomfortable sigh. Sakura knew this expression from anywhere. Her father often did it when he was frustrated with something, or didn't know what to do or how to approach something. His face was sad, and Sakura knew that something was wrong. However, she did as her father asked, sitting beside them in their living room. The room was dimly lit, a small table in the middle of it. There was a cabinet that held books and other trinkets on one wall, and a large window behind them that the endless night could be seen through. They want you to agree to a political marriage. Kazashi began, causing his daughter to gasp in surprise, and somewhat in relief too. Her first worry was that the Uchiha had come to end their lives, and the fear of it had settled deep into the pit of her stomach. Marriage? Why? Sakura asked, a little puzzled. What would a marriage to her offer them? Would something like that really protect her people? Don't know. Something doesn't feel right about it. The circumstances seem odd. I don't like the idea of it. Kozashi admitted. But if we don't comply with their wishes, then what? Sakura questioned, worried that she already knew the answer to her question. It will end all of our lives. They won't let a single soul live. No woman, or child. Kozashi growled. I should have protected our people better. We should have. No. Sakura interrupted, her voice wavering, but firm. If that's what they want, then I will do it to protect my people. I don't know how I could ask this of you, my daughter. Kozashi sighed, his body language conveyed defeat. Sakura could feel the sorrow in his voice, the helplessness her father was feeling, the failure he probably felt he was. You don't have to. To be honest, I was afraid that you would never come back. I was afraid that if they killed you, I would be able to do nothing for our people. Father, Sakura could feel the tears that stung at her eyes that threatened to fall. Her emotions were an uncertain wreck as she felt the relief of her father coming home, and the dreaded fear of what was to come. In an instant, their way of life had been threatened. You are my daughter, Sakura. You will always find a way to protect the people that you love. Kozashi encouraged, trying to console his daughter. You are so much like your mother. So much stronger and braver than you ever will know. Sakura embraced her father in a tight hug, feeling the warmth of his familiar arms wrapped around her in his fatherly embrace. However, the sound of a large explosion immediately separated them from their embrace as their small home shook with the vibration. In a panic, Sakura raced to the window only to be met with a scene of horror. Without thinking, and ignoring the panicked call from her father, she hastily ripped open their wooden front door, sprinting outside. People were screaming everywhere. What was going on? How could the Uchiha attack them like this? Had the talks of political marriage been a ploy to keep them unaware of their true intentions? She raced towards the main village, willing her feet to carry her faster than they were, as the fires that engulfed the buildings became wild and large, angrily burning everything they touched, the sound of wood crackling in the heat, and the screams of the night only getting louder. Tears began to stream down her face as her chest tightened up in an unbearable knot and the urge to hurl the contents of her stomach almost became too great. Her heart felt like it was being stabbed. It was too late though. The stench of death and spilled blood polluted the air as Sakura's eyes were met with the sight of dead bodies piled on the streets of the town, the pathways stained red, the walls painted in their blood. Sakura immediately ran over to a man on the floor, clutching his chest as his clothes became soaked in his blood. Who did this to you? What? Sakura begged as she quickly moved to heal him. The gift she had been given. Her palms began to glow green. If he was alive she would save him. No, don't Sakura, don't let them see. Sakura wanted to sob. What did he mean? Suddenly, two women came running across the road in front of her, screaming, as a sword impaled them from behind, their bodies lifeless and spilling blood as they fell to the ground with a loud thud right before her eyes. Sakura was petrified. The man she had been trying to help was gone too. She couldn't save him. In front of her, however, stood a younger-looking man dressed fully in black. He had dark hair, fashioned in messy spikes, but most prominent of all was the red glowing eyes that were eerily beautiful. He was godlike and like no one Sakura had ever seen before in his life. He didn't look like he belonged in this world. She had never been more terrified in her life. The man had spotted her, turning his attention towards her, his sword firmly gripped in his right hand, drenched in the blood of the villagers he had slaughtered. He began to walk towards her, as if in no hurry, as if he could kill her in the blink of an instant if he so chose to. Sakura willed her feet to move, but her body wouldn't respond. She felt like screaming, but nothing came out as the black-dressed figure approached her, his red eyes fixated on her, his face cold and unforgiving. Sasuke, enough, a voice called, causing the figure to stop momentarily as his head turned towards the direction of the speaker. Sakura's attention became fixated on the man who had commanded the killer in front of her to stop. The man looked eerily similar with his long black hair and haunting red eyes. I've seen what I need to. Take her prisoner. The voice commanded. Everyone else is dead. Sakura's eyes widened in fear as she willed her body to move, to run away, to resist, to scream and fight, but instead, she felt a sharp pain in her neck as her world went black. Death. Sasuke had always been a harbinger of death. His life revolved around it. Death was one of the few things that he was very familiar with. He locked away any emotions he had, indifferent as he struck down one person after another, their screams filling his ears and their blood staining his clothes and the ground he walked on. He spotted two women, who were trembling, taking off once he saw them, and began to make his way to end their lives as well. He watched, almost in amusement, as they screamed, trying to run away from him as if they could escape death. He cut them down easily, mercilessly, as their last screams filled the air as their bodies fell to the bloodstained earth with an audible thud. That's when he saw it. The flash of pink. He turned to see a woman, her face dirty, her pink hair disheveled yet exotically beautiful. He had never seen anything like it. He was almost drawn to it. She wore a red tunic that was form-fitting with black shorts underneath, with shin-length black boots. She looked up at him, and for a moment he was stunned. The fierce green eyes that looked at him in hate and fear. Her face that was feminine and gentle, however, despite the wrath of her expression. A goddess in this world ruled by hate. For a moment, he hesitated, taking his time as he walked towards the frightened woman. Sasuke, stop! The voice of his king rang through the silence. He looked over to Madara, who was walking up to them from behind. He did as he was told. I've seen what I need to. Take her prisoner. He commanded. Everyone else is dead. Why would Madara keep this woman alive? This otherworldly being with pink hair and green eyes. He could see her hate towards his king. He could see her fear. Sasuke did as he was commanded without a second thought, knocking the woman out. What is it you want her alive for? Sasuke inquired as she fell to the ground, unconscious, with a loud thud. I watched her try to heal an old man. Madara replied. For a brief moment, a look of surprise crossed Sasuke's features before he regained his stoic composure. Healing. He thought that ability had died out in the Haruno clan. Sasuke flicked his sword, Kusanagi, splattering the blood on its blade on the ground to clean it before sheathing it. Take her back to camp. Make sure she is restrained. Madara instructed to the other Uchiha men that were with him. You did well, Sasuke. Madara praised as the pink-haired woman was being carried away by the other men who had accompanied Madara. Well, as you said, they were unsuspecting. Though I can't say it was exactly a clean move. Sasuke advised. Madara laughed, amused. To think you would worry about such a thing, Sasuke. You are young, but a good general. But don't forget that we do what we need to in order to gain power. No matter what strategy. Sasuke watched as his king began to walk after the men that were carrying their prisoner, following soon after him. For the first time in a long time, something about this didn't feel right. When Sakura awoke, it was dark, and she was laying on something cold and hard. It was quiet, eerily quiet, and her head hurt. Her whole body ached. Suddenly everything came rushing back. The red eyes, the black, the death. Almost in a panic she stood up, running to the bars in front of her, realizing that she was in a prison cell. Her eyes were still adjusting, but there was a dim light and a figure that sat calmly, still, and almost ethereal beside it. There's no escape. Came a low, masculine and haunting voice that sent a shiver down Sakura's spine as the dark figure stood from its seated position. Where am I? Who are you? Sakura demanded, though her voice was fearful. Her eyes now adjusted to the darker lighting revealed him, however. The man she had seen before. Fear immediately overtook Sakura's body as she began to tremble at the familiarity, however he looked different. His eyes were not red, instead they were a charcoal black and looked as if they could consume her very being. Sakura stumbled backwards, her instincts tell her to get as far away from this man as possible. Quiet, he snapped, his voice almost a growl. I should have ended your life when I had the chance, he mocked. Sakura gritted her teeth, her back against the furthest wall. Then why didn't you? She spat in return. I would be better off dead than in this hell. She knew that she had angered him by his low growl as he threw the cell gate open, storming towards her, his eyes once again red and ruthless. No matter how terrified Sakura was, she couldn't help but stare directly into them. She tried to push herself further back into the wall as if she could sink into it and disappear, the cold stone stinging her skin. Don't think I won't, the moment Madara deems you expendable. He spat venomously. He was so close, his breath fanning on Sakura's face, causing a chill to run down her spine and the hair at the nape of her neck to stand on edge. She could feel her heart thundering in her chest and hear it thundering in her ears. The tension was undeniable between them as her viridian eyes met his red ones in defiance. Snapping his eyes away from her, however, he shoved her from the wall, drawing his sword in a split second, pointing it at her neck. He could easily strike and kill. Madara instructed me to take you to him. He began. Sakura gulped, immediately feeling her body heat up from the anxiety. Don't think that I won't hesitate to kill you the moment you try anything, he threatened. Sakura's eyes were transfixed on the edge of his blade that was at her neck before looking back at the godlike man in front of her, the red glow of his eyes making him appear more demon-like in the darkness. She didn't say anything as Sasuke motioned for her to start walking out of the cell with him following closely in tow. His sword was effortlessly sheathed as he trailed behind her, watching her like a hawk. Roughly, he grabbed her left arm with his right hand, leading her out of the prison area and up a long flight of stone stairs that were dimly lit. His hands were calloused and rough against her skin, no doubt from his swordsmanship. They reached what Sakura assumed was the main floor of the castle, and it was barren and dark, as if it were made to fit the darkness of the Uchiha. Simple, but red tapestries adorned the walls, proudly displaying the Uchiwa fan, the clan symbol of the Uchiha. The hallway she was being led through had many windows, however, the moonlight shining brightly through it. The hallway felt as cold as the prison cell had. It wasn't long before Sasuke opened a large door, shoving Sakura into the room, causing the woman to stumble a little as she shakily raised her head to see Madara sitting leisurely on a throne chair, his legs crossed and an amused egotistical expression on his face. Do you know why you are alive? Madara asked darkly, as Sakura regained her composure. No, Sakura answered, trembling. I noticed that you have a chakra healing ability. I was told that ability had died out in the Haruno clan. Madara began. So I find it odd that you were using it the other night, on that old man. Sweat began to roll down Sakura's forehead, as fear was rampaging through her very being. I have had it since I was a young child. Sakura responded. Well, Madara began. Lucky for you, I'll give you a chance to live. If you obey, that is. Sakura drew in a sharp breath, her chest feeling tight. What would she have to forfeit in exchange for her life? Her father had told her that her gift was rare, and that she had to take special care of it. Was she the reason that they decided to invade her lands in the first place? What do you want from me? She inquired, her voice shaking. A laugh sounded from the Uchiha king. A timid thing, aren't you? Sakura felt insulted by his words, immediately hating the way that she was indeed afraid. I have heard of your ruthlessness. I don't for a minute assume that you won't just kill me. Sakura retorted, her anger giving her voice some firmness. The unamused expression replaced Madara's face once again. Well, I see you have some grit. He continued. No matter. You aren't wrong. I could slay you any time I see fit. However, I feel your abilities could be useful. If you want to stay alive, then you will heal my army when I command it. Madara offered. Sakura gritted her teeth, clenching her fist. She wanted to refuse, she wanted to wipe that smug look off that man's face. She furrowed her brows, her eyes clenching shut as she allowed her anger to burst. I would rather die than be your tool, she screamed. Where is my father? Where are my people? You, immediately, Sasuke grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her, causing her to let out a sharp yelp of pain. Madara was glaring at her now, irritated by her outburst. "Sasuke, let her go," he commanded. Sakura felt his hard hands release her as he let out an agitated grunt. Sakura fell to the floor, rubbing her wrists. "Your father is dead. Now, perhaps I should be the one to inquire about you," Madara hissed. Sakura's eyes widened in horror, knowing that there was no lie in his words. They really had slaughtered everyone, including her father. She could feel the tears immediately begin to sting at her eyes as she fought them back. "My name is Sakura Haruno. Kozashi Haruno was my father," she croaked, trying to keep from sobbing. "Ah, so you were his daughter." Madara wondered aloud. "Well, no matter. I'm putting you under Sasuke's command now since he is the general of my army." Sakura looked up at the man who towered behind her. He stared at her, almost as if trying to figure her out, his mouth set in a thin line. His eyes were no longer red and had returned to the color of the black endless pits that threatened to swallow her. "I have no interest in babysitting this woman," Sasuke refused as he looked at his king. "Well, I'm handing her off to you. As you know, if you think that she will cause more problems than good, end her," Madara answered, almost nonchalantly as if her life were a toy. Well, it was a toy. For them. Sakura stiffened as Sasuke's rough hands reached down to yank her up onto her feet, pulling her onto her feet in one fluid motion like she was a sack of flour as he mumbled something under his breath. "I will grant you a room to stay in, unless you would prefer to stay in a prison cell," Madara informed. "Go to hell," Sakura cursed, earning her a sharp shove from Sasuke as he pushed her out of the room, shutting the door loudly behind him. "Watch how you speak," he threateningly growled as he began to lead her away. No other words were exchanged between them as Sasuke led her back down to the cell, unceremoniously shoving her inside before shutting the metal gate on her once again. Sakura glared at him, watching as he stomped away before she slumped against the wall, breaking into a sob at the realization that her father had been brutally murdered, and that she had left him to that fate, alone. That woman was frustratingly defiant, and he hated how her defiance challenged him and interested him. Sasuke angrily stomped away from the cell, unable to get the fierce look of defiance in her viridian eyes out of his mind. Those eyes were strangely beautiful and alluring, and Sasuke hated the way they locked with his, and the way that his body reacted to them as if it had a mind of its own. He had never met such a woman like her before in his entire life. The way that her soft skin and petite frame felt in his hands were foreign, and he felt almost sinful touching it, wanting to retract contact from her the moment he touched her. Despite the fact that she was no one of value, that she was insignificant to everything that he believed in, every time everything he knew dictated that he end her, there was an unfamiliar restraint. As if some part of him was begging him not to. While normally he would not tolerate such insolence from anyone, for some reason he found himself currently giving her empty threats. How long would his patience last? Would he end her, sooner than later? Sasuke walked through the cold empty halls that he had guided her through, making his way back to his chambers. No, he would not allow himself to be distracted, allow himself to feel anything other than what he knew he needed to, and that was the determination to serve Madara. His loyalty to his clan and fulfilling their ideas was all that mattered to him. As he neared his room, ready to try and let sleep take him, he found Madara casually leaning on the wall beside the doors to his room. "I see you are still ruthless, despite your hesitation," he commented casually, a dark look in his eye. "I see no reason to treat that woman to any luxuries if she is defiant," Sasuke stated, keeping his expression stoic. "Yet, I can see unusual hesitation," Madara observed. Sasuke frowned. "Do you doubt my loyalty to you?" he questioned flatly. Madara smirked. "I don't. I know that you are here to help me achieve my goal and make it a reality. I just find this rather intriguing is all," Madara replied nonchalantly, waving his hand in dismissal as he pushed himself from the wall, beginning to walk away, his back turned towards Sasuke. However, Sasuke, Madara paused, his footsteps stilling, turning his head to look back at his general. Betrayal would not be treated lightly, even if it were you. Sasuke watched as Madara continued off after his passive warning. Sasuke clenched his fist, glaring at the back of Madara, disliking that this woman had so obviously shown that he could hesitate. That there was some part of him that could be weak. When Madara faded out of view, he slipped into his room, slamming his door shut roughly with his irritation. Unceremoniously, he began to take off his armor and cloak, letting it drop to the floor, but leaving Kusanagi attached at his hip. Sasuke walked over to his desk, glancing at the picture he kept of his mother, father, and older brother. If it wasn't for this war, maybe they wouldn't be dead. Sasuke had worked hard to become someone Madara could trust, even if it was at the expense of the humanity he probably has lost. Nothing could ever help him regain that after the death of those that he held dear. He had made that his reason for fighting, his reason for killing. His reason for following Madara to the end of hell. Not only was he left to fend for his own, but even his best friend had betrayed him, believing that his way wouldn't be good enough. Believing that those murderers had a better ideal for this world. Sasuke was alone. A small ray of light coming from the small window in Sakura's cell began to filter into the dark cold room, causing the Pinka to slowly open her eyes, revealing their viridian color as she brought her hands to her face to try and rub the sleepiness away. Her eyes were swollen, she could tell from the sobbing that she had done the night before in the despair of her father's death. There was no one waiting outside her cell this time as she huddled in the corner that she had fallen asleep in. She was not sure how long she had actually slept, and felt the soreness and weakness in her body. What is it she should do from here? Everything that she had ever known, everyone that she had ever loved, they were all gone. Would her life be worth living? The empty darkness of this prison offered her no comfort. Would she stay here until she rotted away, becoming nothing but another death in this war? She wasn't sure, but she felt that maybe she had drifted back to sleep momentarily as a dream came to her. Sakura, you are a special girl. Your gift can save many lives. It's like spring, bringing new life to those in need. Remember, my kind, sweet, beautiful girl, that every life is worth saving. Yes, I know, but what if that person tried to hurt me? She couldn't see her face, the woman who spoke to her, but she was kind. She could feel a warmth, familiar as if she had known it all her life. Sakura, remember, that peace is always brought by love. I will watch over you, always. Don't forget your kindness, your resolve. But the world is cruel, everyone I love is gone. Everything I know is gone. Despair breeds hatred. Would you give in to despair? The voice asked. Is it worth to give up on everything that could be? The figure began fading away, as if a distance began to grow between them. Sakura yearned to chase after it. Wait, don't go. Wait, She wasn't sure how much time passed when she awoke from her dream before she heard the sound of footsteps coming towards her, though she could tell by the heaviness of them that they did not belong to someone heavy, making them most likely a female's footsteps. When the figure came into view, Sakura was relieved to find that her assumption was right. A black-haired woman with black hair eyes, just like Madara and Sasuke, came into view, holding a plate plain rice and vegetables. She must clearly be part of the Uchiha clan. Sakura eyed the woman carefully from the corner of her cell, watching as she opened the cell gate, placing the food down on the floor before closing the gate behind her and walking away. The woman had looked terrified. Staring at the food for a moment, Sakura wondered whether she should eat it or not. Her stomach protested at her hesitance, begging her to fill her body with some kind of nutrient, but Sakura's mind was stubborn. Her grief bred defiance. She didn't know how long it was before she heard another set of footsteps that came, becoming louder as they neared her cell. Sakura was still sitting in the corner, her knees tucked up into her chest as she buried her face into her arms that were wrapped atop them. Do you plan to just starve yourself? A harsh voice grunted, though Sakura knew immediately who it belonged to. Silence. Sakura felt no desire to answer his question, as she refused to move. She wanted to hide her face. She didn't want him to see the evidence of her grief. She heard the cell door open and his heavy footsteps enter, the stone loud underneath his footsteps as he stalked towards her sulking form. There's work to be done, but if you want to rot in this cell, fine. The voice conceded. Sakura lifted her head, her eyes meeting with Sasuke's. For a moment, she thought she saw a momentary glimpse of a shocked look on his face before it was quickly replaced by his cold expression. He looked slightly different in the light of the sun, perhaps less menacing, and more human-like. And if I don't go? Sakura asked quietly. Then we have no need of you. Sasuke reminded her. What is it you want? There was a pause before she received an answer. We have men who have been wounded. They need treatment, and are more likely to survive with your abilities. Sasuke stated. Sakura stared at her hands for a moment, thinking what a curse her abilities had turned out to be, before clenching them, remembering her dream. Without a word, Sakura brought herself to her feet, her eyes meeting Sasuke's. Fine, she replied curtly. Sasuke frowned as Sakura noticed him giving her a quick glance up and down. Let's go then, he commanded. With that, Sasuke turned on his heel, in which Sakura followed. At least this way she would walk with dignity instead of being dragged by him. It was rather an unpleasant experience the night before. The castle didn't seem quite so grim in the sunlight. Though it was still plain and almost barren, there were servants bustling around, doing their thing. Sakura felt a little uncomfortable as they glanced at her, but it seemed like something would send them scurrying away. Sakura didn't know how long it was before Sasuke stopped. However, two women came rushing towards him, bowing. Clean her up, Sasuke commanded. The women bowed. Yes, General. They responded. Sakura was caught off guard at the suddenness of it. The women didn't look at Sasuke as they turned their attention towards her, inching towards her, which caused Sakura to take a couple steps back in hesitation. However, Sasuke cast her a glare that made her stop in her tracks. The two women gently grabbed her arms, pushing her away. This way please, one of them said quietly. Sakura surrendered her to their lead as they pulled her towards a nearby door, opening it and pulling her inside. The whole room was a bathing area with a massive bath at the back of it. The room was steamy, and the heat was welcome upon Sakura's skin. The maids began to work on removing Sakura's clothes, in which she immediately yanked herself away from their touch. Sorry, I've always done this myself. She apologized, upon seeing the startled look on the maids' faces. Okay, remove them yourself then. One of the maids responded as she gave Sakura her space. The other followed and was smaller than the maid that had spoke to her. What are your names? Sakura asked as she began to remove her clothes. Umi and Reki. The older one spoke. I am Umi and this is my younger sister Reki. She doesn't talk really, but follows instructions. Sakura frowned. They both looked fairly young, and again had the same dark features as she had seen on every person that she had met here. How did you come to be a maid here? Sakura asked, curious. We are orphans and so Lord Madara lets us live in the workers' quarters in exchange for our work. Reki replied. I see. Sakura trailed off. What happened? To your parents, I mean. Sakura continued. She realized that she had bruises on her arms and legs, most likely from being in the prison and everything that had happened. They died in the war. Reki replied. Sakura felt her heart sink. The war affected those of the Uchiha clan that died just as much as anywhere else. These poor kids were like her, their parents killed. Okay, well, I can clean myself if you show me how this all works. Sakura offered, trying to change the subject. Come this way then, Reki instructed, her sister following her. Sakura followed them, seeing her reflection in the mirror for the first time, almost gasping at how different she looked. Her skin was unusually pale, bruises decorating her body. Her hair was disheveled, and there was tear-streaking dirt on her face. Her eyes looked dull in comparison to their usual lightness, and her eyes looked tired and puffy. No wonder Sasuke had given her a strange look. She almost didn't recognize herself in the mirror. The water faucet is here. Reki began. You turn it like this. Unfortunately the water from the faucet is cold, but the big bath is heated. Sakura nodded. There is a container of soap powder over there. We try to keep it dry as this is the community bath for all of us who work here. You mean you all share this? Sakura inquired, curious. Reki nodded. Yes. Sakura didn't ask any further questions as she began to do as Reki had instructed. Also, they don't like us to take a long time, and the general isn't a super patient person. We should hurry, Reki suggested. Sakura almost wanted to roll her eyes at the mention of his name. It's not like she hadn't already figured that out. Okay. Sakura hurriedly began to wash the dirt and dried blood from her body. The soap did not smell of anything, but at least she felt a little cleaner. She quickly scrubbed her long pink hair, wringing it out once the soap rinsed clean. She stared at the bath, her body aching to go sit in the warm water, but she thought it was not something she should chance doing right now. Can I have a towel? Sakura asked, her body shivering a little from the cold water. Yes, but don't you want to warm up in the bath? Reki asked as Umi brought her a towel. No, it's okay. Okay. Well, they're clothes just in that room over there, Reki informed, pointing Sakura in the direction of what looked like a little dressing room. Sakura hadn't noticed them before. What about my clothes? Sakura questioned. Reki's face dropped. Well, they are dirty, but the general said you were not to wear them anymore. Reki replied. Sakura frowned. Fine, just show me what I can wear, but let me keep my gloves, please. Sakura begged, following behind Reki into the dressing room. It was plain with wooden seats and square shelves. Towels were neatly folded and aligned on them, with baskets for dirty clothes and rows of folded clothes that Sakura presumed were clean. There was almost no choice of colors, however, as it seemed that red, navy and white were the only colors available. She began to look through them, trying to find something acceptable for her to wear. In the end, she settled for a red tunic and black pants. The tunic had sleeves that came down to her elbows and on the looser side, while the pants were also looser but at least more fitted. She found a black tie that she could keep most of her hair out of her face with, and was glad that her shoes had been left for her. Sakura caught one more glimpse of herself in the mirror, noting that at least she wasn't dirty and her hair was less disheveled, though her eyes were still dull, and she still had bags under them. However, considering everything that she had just been through, she at least looked a little more like herself. She gave her thanks to the two little girls before stepping back out into the castle hallway. She was met by a rather irritated-looking Sasuke. Whatever he might have been thinking underneath his apparent irritation was hidden well by his grumpiness. Let's go, he commanded. Sakura didn't say anything as she followed him. This time, he led her down a different wing of the castle, but it was obvious that it was set up a little differently. There were other women who hurried around, some with blood on them and panic. Sakura found it odd how dismissal of the scene Sasuke seemed to be, as if he was used to such things. He curtly turned to enter one of the rooms, and as Sakura walked in she could immediately smell the blood, sweat and rot that filled the room. If she had any contents in her stomach, she probably would have emptied them onto the floor, right then and there. These men were wounded on a scouting mission, ambushed by the Senju. Get them healed up, Sasuke demanded. Sakura sighed. The men were quiet at the sight of the general, as if they were afraid that one whine of pain out of them would end their lives. Sakura walked towards them, unsure how she should start. She had always healed small injuries and things in her village, only having helped a gravely injured village member maybe once or twice. Which one of you sustained the worst injuries? Sakura inquired as she tried to figure out what her first move would be. Him. Over there. His side was torn up pretty bad by a sword. One of them grunted. Sakura turned to see a man laying down in the corner of the room. Without another word she began to make her way over to him. A man was laying on his side, looking really pale as he clutched bloodied clothes to it. Grabbing the gloves that she had kept from her clothes, she pulled them on. This was why she had wanted to keep her gloves. She had always worn them when healing people. Carefully removing the bloodied cloth, a nasty gash was revealed underneath. Blood began to run down the man's stomach as the pressure was removed. Sakura immediately placed her hands slightly above the wound, concentrating as her hands began to glow green. She could hear the gasps of the other men as they watched. Sakura concentrated as she willed the man's flesh to mend back together. It took a little time, but he stopped bleeding, the wound eventually closing up enough for him to get stitches and bandaged. Rubbing the sweat that had formed on her forehead, she turned to the other men. "Okay, who next?" she asked calmly. The men looked at each other, and at Sasuke, who had been standing there, watching this whole time. Sakura waited for their instruction and went to work on each wound that dictated needing something more than just bandages. She had probably closed up another 7 major but not life-threatening wounds before all of a sudden she began to feel herself become faint. That's right, she didn't eat, and it had been a while since her last meal. She had to push through though. She refused to show any weakness on her part, but it seemed that she wouldn't get a choice. Before she realized it, her vision went black. Sasuke wasn't sure what exactly had happened, but all of a sudden Sakura fell to the floor, eliciting panic from the soldiers that she had been healing. Sasuke frowned. This woman was already getting people worked up about her. Pathetic. One glare from him was enough to make them all shrink away. That stupid woman had probably used up more energy than she had. Sasuke was observant enough to realize that because she stubbornly had refused her food, she probably hadn't eaten in at least 2 days at this point. Without a word, he stalked out of the room. "Take that woman passed out on the floor to maid's quarters," he ordered to 2 males. "Yes sir." He continued on his way. It was time for him to train anyways. Heading down towards the training room, Sasuke found himself irritated. He had honestly been intrigued by her ability to heal, watching the skin mend right beneath her glowing green hands. As if her hands held warmth and life in their very palms. He scoffed at himself. He reached the training room, throwing open the door to find Madara sitting in the middle of the dirty arena. "You're late," he commented. "I was observing the prisoner heal our scout party that was ambushed." Sasuke answered. "I see. I guess she does value her own life after all," Madara observed. "Perhaps. However, if she steps out of line, I will keep my word," Sasuke replied in assurance. Madara nodded in acknowledgement, pushing himself off the ground, walking to the edge of the arena to grab his favorite war fan. Sasuke withdrew Kusanagi in response, waiting for his king to return to the middle of the arena for their training. Madara had taught him a great deal of his swordsmanship even though he himself preferred to use a war fan. "Do you remember what I said about the Senju being able to switch their tactics?" Madara inquired as the two began to circle each other in anticipation of who would strike the first blow. "Yes, I should have thought more carefully about it before sending out that scout party," Sasuke replied, knowing that Madara was reprimanding him for his carelessness. Indeed, not that their lives would have mattered. Sasuke kept his expression stoic and unreadable. Madara was right, life was expendable, soldiers were expendable, however, the numbers of their army would truly suffer at such recklessness. Sasuke had at least learned that they needed to be somewhat diligent in finding ways to keep their men from being killed. "If that is so, then why bring this up?" Sasuke inquired, curious at the hot and cold attitude the king was taking. "In a sense, we can be more powerful if less men die. And, less men will die, so long as that woman cooperates," Madara divulged as he decided to make the first move in swinging at Sasuke, who deflected it easily with his sword. Madara was toying with him. "You're suggesting a motive," Sasuke realized. Madara smirked. Perhaps. Sasuke knew this smirk of Madara's all too well. There were many things that Madara did that even Sasuke didn't know about, but it did not stop him from serving him loyally. Sasuke decided he would try to use his agility to find an opening to land a blow onto Madara, though it seemed that Madara was well defensed. He always was, but it never stopped Sasuke from trying. Openings are not always easy to find, but when you find one, Madara began, as if tutoring. You must get rid of it, or else you will become weak. Madara easily deflected Sasuke's attempt, sending him stumbling back. Sasuke stared at him. What was it exactly that man surmising? Indeed, Sasuke agreed curtly. Sometimes, no matter what value they have. Sasuke immediately knew what Madara was getting at. Sasuke gripped Kusanagi tighter, causing his knuckles to go white. Was Madara accusing him of being weak, again? Without thinking, he lunged at Madara, who in turn kicked him into the ground, pointing his war fan at Sasuke's throat. When are you going to come at me for real? He taunted. Sasuke glared at him, knocking his fan with Kusanagi out of his face as he quickly got himself back up, taking a defensive stance. Madara chuckled. When are you going to stop letting emotions drive you? He continued, still taunting Sasuke. My emotions do not drive me. They are nothing but a weakness. Sasuke affirmed, reining in his anger, though the smirk on Madara's face threatened to fuel it even more. Sasuke's eyes had turned crimson red. Yes, that look of hate on your face. The look of a killer. He praised. That's the Sasuke that I know. In response, Madara's black eyes flashed to the crimson red of his own Uchiha blood trait. As usual, Sasuke was still unable to best Madara at a duel, even it was training. He was ruthless. Sasuke did not train with him often, but whenever he did, it always ended up with him getting some sort of a wound. He was lucky that this time he made it out with just a gash on his bicep. He had taunted him all evening, but Madara was the closest thing that Sasuke had to a family. He headed towards the maid's quarters, wondering if that stubborn woman had woken up yet. It was now evening. It was as if everyone could sense that he was in an especially foul mood this evening, as everyone he passed seemed to hide or scurry away more than usual, or perhaps he usually never paid it much mind. Heading straight into the maid's quarters, he found it empty luckily, except for Sakura, who was sitting on the side of one of the cots, staring out at the moonlight. If she had noticed his entrance into the room, she made no indication of it. You have limits, Sasuke announced, his low smooth voice causing the pink-haired woman to jump a little bit as if she had been startled. Yes, I do, Sakura replied, though she did not turn her attention towards Sasuke as she continued to stare at the moonlight that came in through the sole window of the room. Now that she wasn't dirty, Sasuke noticed the way that it reflected off of her pale skin. Her skin glowed softly in the moonlight, and for the second time Sasuke thought that she looked otherworldly. Do you value your life? That question was enough to make Viridian eyes meet with his. They were a dark shade of green in the moonlight, but that same defiance and determination shone in them. This woman was a creature that Sasuke did not understand. Enough to know that I want to see this war end. Sakura replied ominously. Sasuke studied her face for a moment, as if trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind her words, however she averted her gaze, looking away from him once again. Sasuke was not sure how he should respond to her words. Enough to see the war end. What had she meant by that? Did that mean that she would just do whatever she needed to in order to stay alive until that point? The war will end, with Madara leading the way, Sasuke finally said, stating what he believed. Hatred will only breed hatred. She replied, causing Sasuke to be only more confused at her strange words, yet angered by them. You do not know of what you speak. He spat, allowing his anger to rise. Sakura once again turned to him, her face showing every evidence of dislike that she had for him. He hadn't seen that look since the night that they had taken her from her home. Will you punish me for having a difference of opinion then? She challenged in response. This caused Sasuke's demeanor to change, his face turning into a threatening glare. Don't forget that I will put you out of your misery any time I see fit. I'm not afraid of you, Sakura argued, standing from the cot as if she truly was challenging the Uchiha. However, the sudden change of expression on her face indicated what Sasuke already knew. His eyes had turned crimson red as he stepped towards her. He saw the fear that flashed across her face before she tried to regain her composure. Sakura stepped back as he stepped forward, as if on instinct. "You should be, Sakura." Sakura almost flew upright in her cot, her body feeling hot as night sweats had made her feel damp. Those crimson red eyes that belonged to that dark brooding general had haunted her again. She hadn't seen Sasuke in 3 days following their argument in this very room, and dreams of his terrifying red eyes had invaded her dreams every night since. Dreams of her father, her village, the death that had come. The other maids were sound asleep, and Sakura had no idea what time it was, but the room was still pitch black, the only source of light being the moonlight that shone in through the window. Rubbing the sweat from her forehead, she decided to head into the small bathroom that was attached to their sleeping quarters, heading straight for the sink and turning it on. The cold water she splashed on her face bringing her some relief from the feeling of burning up. Her chest felt heavy. She felt like it was difficult to breathe, like she was trying to air in through a narrow funnel. She grabbed a towel that had been hung nearby, drying off her face and neck. She would have to get up a little earlier to bathe, again. This had become the norm over the past few nights as each night the same recurring nightmare came back to haunt her dreams. When Sasuke hadn't appeared the next day after his threat, Sakura felt some sort of relief. Instead, instructions had been left for her to continue to go to the medical wing and heal those that were sick and wounded. If she were to disobey, she would be killed. Sakura did as she was instructed, noticing that Sasuke had indeed left a few Uchiha soldiers that sneered at her as she would walk by, their dark, onyx eyes staring hatefully as if they could burn holes through her very being. No doubt they had been instructed to deal with her if she were to step out of line. However, when another day passed, and there was still no Sasuke, she began to become curious as to why she hadn't heard or seen him even once. Rumors began to spread in the castle. Apparently Madara had sent him to deal with the clean-up and occupation of her now desolate home. The mention of her home made her feel sick to her stomach. He was there, and she wasn't. If she ever in her lifetime got a chance to return, it would never be the same. The people she once knew would be gone, with no trace of them ever existing left behind. Her heart ached. She wished that she hadn't left her father that night. She wanted to grieve, to despair, and in some ways, she felt almost numb. Another day passed after that, which brought her to her current predicament, standing in the darkness of the bathroom, desperately trying to ground herself to something in all this chaos. Desperately trying to not let her nightmares consume her. Returning to the cot that she had been given, she laid quietly, staring at the bottom of the cot that was above her. She had somewhat come to know the young woman who slept above her. Her name was Suki, and she was a shy and timid girl, again carrying the same featuristics of the black hair and onyx eyes that it seemed every Uchiha had. However, Sakura could see the sadness in them. The experience of loss. Sakura had wondered if her eyes would look the same as they do now, reflecting that same sadness and loss. Would she look like this woman did forever? While she was of the Uchiha clan and had lost her parents to the war, like the other two maids that Sakura had first met, she still seemed less tragic as Sakura felt, as selfish as that thought was. It was then that a spark of determination began to take hold in her heart. If there was nothing left of her past, nothing left of what she had once known, and no one else to remember it, then Sakura would be the one to carry those memories, and for that reason she would have to survive. If she survived this war, she would find a way to visit her home once again, and she would find a way to preserve the memories of the life she had once lived. Sakura didn't know how long she had sat there, lost in her thoughts when the first rays of light from the sun began to penetrate the room, bringing light into an otherwise weary place. Taking this as her cue, she quietly got up, grabbing her gloves and the fabric that she used to tie her hair back when needed. She would quickly bathe before heading to the medical wing and doing her duties. She was glad that for the most part, it seemed that everyone seemed to leave her alone in the medical wing so long as she was doing her work. They would bring her wounded men, and even women at times as she quietly offered up her abilities to heal them. Rarely were there ever words exchanged. Sometimes, they would protest to such an outsider such as herself coming anywhere near them, calling her filth, but she would do her job to heal them if she could, biting back her tongue as she was insulted. There was a part of Sakura that almost didn't care. All of those insults couldn't bring out her defiance the way that Sasuke did. It was going to be another long day, but she would get through it. Madara sat quietly in his study, reading the reports that Sasuke had sent to update him on the status of their occupation of the homeland of what was once the Haruno clan. He needed to send Sasuke away. He had noticed the questioning look Sasuke had almost forgotten to rein in when Madara had informed him that he was sending him personally to oversee it. Such a trivial thing to Sasuke, he was sure as any of his other higher-up officials could have easily overseen such a thing, but Madara couldn't help but test Sasuke. He was seeing hesitation in him like he had not seen before. Sasuke was just a child when he had found him, cradled in the corner of his home, blood splattered on the floor and walls as the child stared at the bodies of his dead parents. A horrible betrayal. His older brother Itachi had betrayed him, killing off most all higher-up officials in the clan, and anyone who had a high chance of manifesting the eyes of the blood trait. At first, Madara was unsure of why he had left this little boy alive, and when Madara had found him alive, he at first was going to put the child out of his misery. However, the red of his eyes had made him change his mind. Instead, he decided to take the boy in. He would train him to be his loyal servant, train him in combat, and train him to use his eyes. After all, they were the only two in the clan left who could manifest them. If anything, he would be a useful tool in his conquest to end the Senju and bring the known world under his rule. There would be order under his rule, the strong would survive and the weak perish. Sasuke had turned out exactly as he had raised him. He taught him sword skills, taught him to kill, and to throw away any emotions. He had turned him into the perfectly obedient tool. He had manifested his eyes, learning how to use them. Sasuke was indeed someone who rained down death upon Madara's enemies. However, for the first time since Sasuke was a child, Madara was seeing hesitation from his ruthless general. He was seeing a flicker of questions in his eyes. He was seeing something foreign when it came to the pink-haired woman. Madara found this intriguing enough to let her live. Despite the threats of death, if she were to die, she would not die by his hand. No, she would have to die by Sasuke's hand, to be sure that he eliminated any doubt from him. Perhaps he should see just how Sasuke would act when it came down to whether her life amounted to anything or not. Would he strike her down? Madara was a mastermind of manipulation, and he knew this. Manipulating Sasuke was what he did best. The task of cleaning up and repairing damage to such a small village seems like something that shouldn't take this long, but it was proving to be longer than Sasuke anticipated. There was extensive damage from the fires to many of the buildings, and the cleanup of littered bodies almost took an entire day itself. There was blood and death everywhere. Returning to this place was truly a gruesome sight, eerie, and it smelled of death. Where Sasuke thought that perhaps he should feel something, he held control of his emotions, of his thoughts, scarcely allowing them to linger on the thoughts of the people who had lost their lives here, and what had been so abruptly taken from them. His statement that night still held true, however. Madara was indeed an intelligent man, however he hadn't realized to just what extent the man could be deceitful. "General, the main house. We are going to clear it out for you now," came a soldier with a report. Today, they had been working on clearing out the debris and doing what repairs they could to the building in order to turn this into a military post for the Uchiha army. "Good, I'll come see to the process," Sasuke acknowledged curtly. The soldier bowed before heading off. Sasuke had been camped out on the outskirts of the village, directing all the work. Finishing looking over some papers, and plans that had been drawn out of how they would manage the newly occupied village, Sasuke finished reading his report from Madara, who was demanding why it was taking so long. He had no mention of his prisoner, not that it mattered. If Madara were to end her life, it would be one less thing to deal with. That's what he had convinced himself. The memory of her viridian eyes, filled with challenge and determination, flashed through his mind, however, causing him to scowl. Why would he think of such a thing now? Putting the letter down, Sasuke gave a sigh as he decided to follow shortly after the soldier who had told them that they were just now getting to work on what they thought was the clan leader's house. That house had been Sakura's home. He'd be lying if he said he didn't find himself at least a little bit curious as to what kind of life that she was living. How much would he be able to find out about her based on the contents of their house? Their home had been situated a little outside of the main village. Upon first glance, Sasuke thought it to be small and quaint, but it was still a little bit larger than the other homes that were in the village itself. The front door had been left ajar, the windows of the home shattered. They would have to be replaced before the home offered any sort of true refuge from the wrath brought down by nature's sky. He noticed that 2 of the soldiers were carrying a lifeless body, male obviously, but it was the pink hair that gave his identity away. Sasuke wasn't quite sure what compelled him to stop them. "You over there," he low, calm voice commanded. The men stopped, almost as if freezing in place at the sound of the voice that belonged to their general. "That man, bury him out back," Sasuke ordered. At first the soldiers looked at him confused, wondering why Sasuke didn't want them to take this lifeless body to where they were burning the rest of the dead, but one menacing glare quickly garnered their compliance as they quickly changed course, taking the lifeless body out behind the house. Enemy or not, Sasuke still found it in himself to respect the leader of his enemies enough to give them at least a proper burial, even if there would be no marked grave, or no trace that the man had ever existed. Turning his attention to the house once more, Sasuke began to make his way into the home. At first glance, it seemed like a normal home, the evidence of people having really lived their life in this home apparent, but the living room told the true sad story. Messy, a small table that was flipped, a leg broken, books scattered everywhere, most likely from a force that had knocked them from their place on the bookshelf. A small couch also sat against the wall with window, however it was stained red. While it was not Sasuke who had definitely been here, Madara had definitely slain the clan leader in this room. It smelled of decaying blood. He noted that some of the blood had dried onto the floors and walls. Had Sakura been here, she would have most likely been slain beside her father. Pushing those thoughts from his mind, Sasuke once again turned his attention to the rest of the home. Pictures were neatly placed in the hallway, untouched, collecting dust. He turned his attention to them for a moment. Many of them were pictures of a young girl with the same pink hair as Sakura, in which he assumed were pictures of her from when she was younger. He noted that she had a rather large forehead in her young age. Another picture was of another woman, one that Sasuke presumed was probably her mother, but other than the one picture, he did not see any more of her. Had her mother died, the rest of the pictures were of her father and her. They were smiling, as if there wasn't a worry in the world. Happy, a foreign lightness to their pictures. Some part of Sasuke felt a moment of longing, as if he wished that it were him and his family in those pictures instead, as if he could have experienced the happiness that was portrayed. He scoffed, for a moment hating his own weakness. Walking through the rest of the home, he noticed that the kitchen still had the remains of a meal in them, though everything that was not in use was neatly put away. There was a small table against the wall in the kitchen, seating for 2. This confirmed this suspicion that Sakura had lost her mother at some point. He continued on towards what he thought were the bedrooms. Upon first glance, the first room he walked into was definitely her father's. It was plain but held evidence of someone who clearly oversaw many things. Papers were littered everywhere. Things were messily written on the walls. He decided not to linger there any longer as he came upon a second room. This room most definitely had to belong to Sakura. At first he immediately recognized the scent that lingered. It was sweet, calming, and almost inviting. Her room was less plain, her bed still messy with clothes piled in a corner. There was a desk as well, however the desk was neatly organized, which Sasuke found odd amongst the rest of the room that was chaotic. A bookshelf sat on one wall across from her bed and next to her desk, and Sasuke was able to make out several medical texts. At first glance he was able to see quite a few herbology books, and then some that were anatomical. There was a picture of Sakura smiling with that same woman who he had seen in the picture in the hallway, her mother. She looked younger in that picture, her hair short. Before he could continue analyzing, however, a soldier once again came to report to him, interrupting his thoughts. "General, a mercenary is here demanding an audience with you." Immediately Sasuke knew who it was. "Tell him I wait outside my tent." Sasuke responded gruffly. That mercenary never once failed to show when Sasuke was away from the castle. Feeling that he had spent longer than he should have allowed himself in Sakura's home, he quickly left her room, hastily exiting the home. Even from this far, he could see the familiar color of yellow and orange that stood in the distance, waiting for him. "It's unlike you to contact me." Sasuke was now next to the man, staring at him in full composure of himself. "It wouldn't have mattered either way. You persistently managed to track me down." Sasuke grunted. "Indeed. What sort of mess did Madara get you into this time?" the man asked again. He was calm, though Sasuke recognized that look of life and determination in his cerulean eyes. He stood there, arms crossed as if he was leisurely enjoying himself, and not risking his life around men who wouldn't kill him without a second thought if Sasuke commanded it. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that, Naruto." Sasuke brushed off. "From what I understood, this is the first time that you Uchiha have dared to begin invading the free clans." Naruto replied in all seriousness. Sasuke brushed past the young man as he continued towards his tent. "You know this won't sit well with the Senju." Naruto called at his back. "I did not make the choice, nor do I care." Sasuke responded coldly. He could hear Naruto's footsteps begin to fall to the earth as he followed the Uchiha. "Why did you call me here, then?" the yellow-haired man inquired again. Sasuke stopped, his back still facing Naruto, but he turned his head to glare at him. "I told you, it would have not mattered if I had or didn't. You always come here like a scourge that won't disappear," he hissed. "Well, it's not like I pose a threat to you." Naruto shrugged nonchalantly. "Doesn't change the fact that if I wanted, I wouldn't kill you right here." Sasuke threatened, even though he knew that his words were most likely falling on deaf ears. They often did when it came to this old childhood friend of his. In an instant, however, Naruto's calm and almost playful expression immediately changed to one that was much darker and serious. "I'd like to see you try," he challenged, his voice serious. This only elicited an irritated growl from the Uchiha. "Anyway, the reason why I came is because there are reports circulating around the Senju that you guys kidnapped a young woman from the clan you occupied and killed everyone else." Naruto began. "Seems like I can confirm the second report at a minimum." "Again, Naruto, that's none of your concern," Sasuke warned. "Does killing all of these people really sit well you, Sasuke?" Naruto asked in seriousness. "It matters to me not. You know you can't keep up this cycle of all the killing. The Senju outnumber the Uchiha 3 times over." Sasuke gritted his teeth, feeling his anger begin to surface though he tried to restrain it. Whenever Naruto did come to visit him, he had always irritated him. It was the weakness of his old bonds that allowed this man to say such things to him. "You know where my loyalties lie," Sasuke said with finality, drawing Kusanagi in a flash, though he knew that Naruto was just as sharp as he was, drawing his own sword to parry his attack effortlessly. By now, the onyx of his eyes had faded to their crimson red. "Crimson met cerulean. TCH. Hostile as ever," Naruto remarked. With that, Naruto knocked Sasuke's Kusanagi from him, as he stepped back and sheathed his own sword. Sasuke lowered his, however, he gripped Kusanagi firmly in his grasp. Without another word, Naruto began walking away, Sasuke's crimson eyes glaring at his back as Naruto stopped for a moment to say one more thing. He did not face Sasuke to say it. "The Senju are onto you," was all he said before he whistled and a brown steed came to his beckoning call. Sasuke glared as Naruto effortlessly mounted the creature before taking off. There was always an underlying warning to Naruto's words. 5 days had passed since Sakura had last seen Sasuke. Her life seemed routine now. The nightmares that came in the night, the work of healing the wounded, and the loneliness of it all. Though some of the other workers in the castle were friendly enough, none of them ever took any special interest in her, almost as if they were being friendly to just be polite. However, she found that most workers preferred to pretend that she just didn't exist, eyeing her out of the corner of their eyes. Perhaps they thought of her as some curse with her pink hair and viridian eyes. It was true that not a single soul had different features in the castle. There was only black hair and onyx eyes that filled the castle. It was the morning on the 6th day. The first night that she actually did not have a nightmare visit her in her dreams. Coming to, she found that everyone in the castle seemed to be in a little bit extra of a hustle. Sakura got up, getting dressed as she usually did, however it didn't mean that she wasn't curious as to what all the commotion was about. Luckily she ran into her top bunkmate. "Suki, what is all the commotion about?" Sakura asked curiously. "Ah," the girl replied, as if startled that Sakura would ask such a thing. "The general is back. Everyone tends to relax a little when he's not around." Sakura looked at her, a little confused, but she supposed that it was probably true. The same tensions, strict structure and very hushed conversations of those who tended to the castle seemed to have been a little bit more relaxed in the last few days. Maybe that's why Sakura found herself a little bit more relaxed herself as she tried to settle into things. "Where is Sakura?" a gruff voice called. Hurriedly finishing the tie in her hair and grabbing her gloves, Sakura dashed out of the maid quarters, the last one out. Here," she replied. The maids were either lined against the wall and scurried into other rooms if they were designated to work there. "The general demands you see him at once," came the voice of an Uchiha soldier. Sakura could tell immediately from the way that he held himself that this maid was prideful, egotistical maybe, and his charcoal eyes held a disdain for her that he didn't ever bother trying to conceal. "Why yes," Sakura replied. The soldier grunted. "What was that? I don't think I quite heard you." He sneered. Sakura knew exactly what this man was insinuating as she grit her teeth. "Yes, sir," she said, emphasizing the "sir," just wanting the man to stalk away. Luckily he gave a grunt of approval, muttering where Sasuke was waiting for her before stalking off. He was the kind of man that Sakura really didn't like. Sakura ignored the strange looks she got from the other maids, some even whispering, and as soon as that soldier was out of sight, she began to head off in the direction she was sure would lead to where Sasuke had instructed her to meet him. She wasn't sure why he wanted her to meet him in the training area, but she did as she was told. When she came to the area, she could hear the angry sound of metal that rang through the air it mercilessly rendered. Peeking in, she saw Sasuke, his sword firmly in the grasp of his right hand as he swung it through the air as if it were the most natural and fluid thing in the world. For a second, Sakura gawked at the fact that he made it look effortless, and that he was not wearing a shirt, training in only his black pants and boots. She wasn't sure how long she had been staring, not realizing it herself until crimson eyes that had been haunted her in her nightmares fixated on her viridian ones, causing her to immediately gasp and quickly enter the room and bow. General. If he had noted that she had been staring at him for a while, he made zero notion of it. "I see you've had a change of attitude," he observed. Silence fell between the two, however Sakura returned to an upright position. That's right. She had found some determination while this man had been gone. For a moment, she saw some unfamiliar expression cross Sasuke's face, but as always he maintained a stoic exterior unusually well. She watched as he walked over to the right wall where he had laid down some items. Sakura surmised that it was probably his shirt, the sheath for his sword, and a container of water. He had been sweating, his skin glistening from the moisture. While he had been turned away, his red eyes had faded to their original onyx color. "I want a report of the men you have been able to heal," he continued. He must have decided to ignore the fact that Sakura had chosen not to give a reply to his earlier comment. "I've been healing them as they have been brought to me. There has not been a single person that has died under my care," Sakura replied back firmly, almost as if she was proud of her work. Sasuke stopped for a moment, as if his body language conveyed his surprise and somewhat disbelief at her words. However, the words that came out of his mouth did not convey that. "I see." His attention was once more turned towards her. Their eyes met again, viridian with onyx. He had a scowl on his face. At this proximity, Sakura could detect there was a different tone to his eyes. Almost as if he was apologetic. She had forgotten just how much those eyes drew her into their bottomless depths. "Did you need me for something?" Sakura asked, desperate to escape his gaze. From this distance she could see everything his torso revealed about him, making her uncomfortable in a foreign way. The scars on his skin, his flat torso and the muscles that he had sculpted with discipline and dedicated time. This only amplified how much he looked as if he didn't belong in this world, his alabaster skin contrasting with his dark features. "No," he curtly replied. His answer confused Sakura for a moment, making her wonder why he had called for her in the first place. "You're excused. Return to work." His back was once again turned to her as he walked towards a different wall that held different weapons in display. Sakura, unsure of what to say or do, stared at his retreating form for a moment before realizing that she needed to get going. Without a sound, she turned from him, and began to walk away, out of the training room and back towards her place in the medical wing. What exactly had been the purpose of him calling for her? It perplexed her, and yet for some odd reason she couldn't help but feel relieved that he had. She was lost in thought as she almost mindlessly made her way back to the medical wing. However, suddenly a male, older, but clearly a Uchiha soldier almost ran right into her, in a state of panic. "Oh, thank goodness," he exclaimed. You're the one who can heal wounds. Please help my friend. He can't." "Where is he?" "Calm down, I will do what I can to help," Sakura replied, almost as if on instinct, her body kicking into alert. "Oh, thank you," the soldier praised. This way, he began to run off in the direction that Sakura thought he came, though she found it a little odd that the hallway seemed a little dim. Wasn't it in the middle of the day? However, Sakura knew that there was much of Uchiha Castle that she had never stepped foot in. She ran deeper into the hallway, the darkness almost seeming ominous. Her mind was begging her to turn back, the natural human instinct to anything it thought might be a threat. However, almost out of nowhere, cold hard hands grabbed her from what seemed like just the wall, wrapping a cloth around her face. Panic immediately set in. Sakura screamed as she tried to pry herself away, but her screams were muffled underneath the thick cloth. It was laced with an odd scent, one that her mind told her was familiar. However, soon, her world went black. The evening was approaching fast, and Sasuke found that he was in an unusually foul mood. He had been in a foul mood more often than not lately. He was stupid for making her come see him, and now he was beyond irritated with himself. It was true that he wanted a report from her own mouth, despite the fact that the soldiers that he had placed on guard to watch her every move had more details to give him than she did herself. Something had changed in her demeanor. He had sensed it when she greeted him in a respectful way, no matter how forced it may have been on her part. That look in her eyes, however, that defiant and determined glare of her viridian irises hadn't changed, and Sasuke found himself wanting to see them. He hated the way that for some inexplicable reason, he felt almost relieved when she presented herself. He had noticed that she had stared at him from the door when she had first arrived to the training room. Had she been afraid to approach him? That would be completely unlike her previous demeanor, however. In fact, she was one of the few people who had ever dared to challenge him at all, and probably one of the few to live through it. Sasuke was in his office, dealing with the paperwork and attending to the army reports that he missed while Madara had sent him away. Perhaps this added to his foul mood as well. It left more for him to do when he returned to the castle. He didn't notice when Madara slithered his way into his office, but Madara immediately had his attention once he heard his voice. "Where has that pink-haired woman been?" he asked, his voice deep and dark. Sasuke frowned, looking up at his king almost as if he was completely confused at the question, however the expression on his face did not show it. "Last I knew, doing her job," Sasuke responded, uninterested. "Well, apparently no one has seen her for some time," Madara informed Sasuke all too calmly. Immediately the Uchiha general stood from his chair, the legs of his seat screeching from the abrupt movement. "Great. Now what the hell was going on? She reported to me earlier today. No one has seen her since," he inquired flatly. "Why was I not informed of this?" he seethed. "Sasuke, I was just happened to hear it in passing, which is why I came down to your office to ask." Madara continued. "It seems that perhaps there has been a misunderstanding somewhere." Sasuke did not like the tone of Madara's voice. It was almost condescending, like Sasuke has utterly failed in his task of keeping that woman in place. "It seems that I have incompetent men. I will take care of the problem immediately." The angry threat in his voice apparent as his face darkened into a displeased scowl. He immediately began to march right past Madara, heading straight for his office door. "Will you strike her down, Sasuke?" came the questioning voice of Madara, as Sasuke disappeared from the room, leaving Madara's question unanswered. He could not answer it. Everything that he had ever been taught dictated that he strike her down, and kill anyone who got in his way. Had she planned to run away? Would that explain her earlier behavior? Feigned obedience for the sake of biding her time? A million questions ran through his mind as he angrily stomped through the hallway. The first place he would go was straight to the medical wing. He would find out anything he could regarding that woman. He was nearing the medical wing, one more corridor to pass by before he would begin to interrogate everything there. If anyone so much as hesitated or lied to him, he would cut them down. There was no place for traitors, he would not tolerate it. Suddenly something green caught his eye in the flicker of dim lights that lit a corridor that strayed off from the main hallway. Green was not a color used to decorate this castle, that he knew. His curiosity dictated that he inspect what the strange green color could be, though his stubbornness demanded that he continue on his way towards the medical wing in his fit of rage. Letting out an angry growl, his curiosity won over his stubbornness as he decided to investigate the foreign green object. Upon nearing it, he realized that it was a green cloth. Kneeling down, Sasuke picked it up, and immediately recognized the scent that came from it. It didn't take him any longer to figure out what most likely had happened to Sakura. Furious, his eyes bled to crimson as he glared at the cloth, squeezing it in his right fist as it erupted in eternal black flames. His attention turned to seeking out whoever had done this. He would hunt down whoever had taken Sakura and kill them with his bare hands. Rough motions, the sounds of hooves beating on the bare earth beneath her, and the darkness is what met Sakura when she began to open her eyes. Her body felt heavy and groggy, however she immediately realized that she had been restrained. A cloth covered her mouth to keep her screams from being heard, and her arms had been entirely bound. Her eyes had not adjusted yet to the darkness, but based on what she could hear, there was a total of 4 horses. She knew that she had been taken captive, however who had taken her she did not have an entire idea of, but a small suspicion given that the soldier that had led her to her current predicament had been an Uchiha soldier. Did they hate her so much that they would kill her themselves? What did they plan to do with her? Did they feel that someone such as herself was really such a threat to their way of life? She continued to lie there as if she was still passed out. For now, it was probably best that she try to figure out exactly what sort of situation she was in if she had any hope of finding a way out. She didn't expect anyone to come for her. Sasuke might. Sakura quickly shut such a ridiculous idea away. He would not. Her mind was stupid for thinking such a thing. She was nothing to a man like him. How far do you think we should go? A deep male voice sounded over the thundering hooves of the horses. I don't think we will have to go much further. Another male voice yelled back in response. I just want to get this over with quickly. A third voice sounded off. Sakura's heart rate began to skyrocket with the implication of what their words meant, and she could feel her body flushing with both adrenaline and anxiety. When the stop would be the only chance she would have at attempting any type of escape, but the chances were they were all Uchiha soldiers, and if they were armed as they most likely were, there was no way she would get far, but she would rather go down putting up a fight. Determination and defiance. Her mind began to race for different ideas on how she could possibly survive and improve her chances. Her gloves. If there was any minuscule chance that Sasuke would go after her, she had to leave him some sort of clue, even if there wasn't much of a chance to begin with. She would have to carefully yank them from her back pocket and toss them while it looked like the galloping from the horse was just throwing her arms around. It was dark, so there was most likely a low chance that the soldier would notice, even if he had placed her belly down in front of him on his horse. Implementing her plan, she let her favorite black gloves fall to the dirt, not knowing whether or not they would be useful to anyone. Mostly likely whoever Sakura's captors were, they would not be able to escape with her unnoticed from the castle grounds in daylight, and would have most likely made their move in the darkness of the night. It didn't take long for Sasuke to figure out that 4 horses were missing, and along with them 4 soldiers. He wasted no time, demanding answers and instructing the stable attendants to ready his trusted horse, Nyx. His horse was as black as he was furious, her coat giving a beautiful shine in the reflection of the moonlight. Sasuke had to think quick. He did not have much to go off of. So far, he had only been able to piece together that Sakura had most likely been knocked unconscious, kept hidden during the day as her captors waited for nightfall, and then taken out under the cover of the darkness. 4 horses missing meant that there was most likely 4 soldiers behind the abduction. Uchiha Castle and its surrounded land was surrounded by a forest, but there was only 2 main roads that led to the clan village and castle that went either north or south. The south road led into the mountains of Indra and would make traversing the terrain difficult, especially at night. The north road, however, took its travelers deeper into the forest. Most likely, her captors would take the forest route. It was much easier to traverse, especially if they wanted to be stealthy and stay undetected by using no form of light to guide their way. Not that it would have entirely mattered, there was a reason that Sasuke was known as the Harbinger of Death. None escaped his crimson eyes. He said nothing as he mounted his mare, Nyx, giving her a sharp kick with the heel of his foot, spurring her into motion. The onyx of his eyes were immediately replaced by his crimson ones as he began to use their prowess to search for things that would otherwise be undetectable to the regular eye. His suspicion had been right, and he knew that he was not far behind their trail. The evidence of recently traveled earth and fresher hoof prints was evident to Sasuke as he commanded Nyx to gallop at her quickest pace. Something caught his detailed vision that seemed a little displaced along the dull dirt of the pathway, shining slightly in the moonlight. In response, he pulled Nyx to a stop, effortlessly dismounting her as he landed onto the hard dry earth beneath him with an audible thud. Reaching down to pick up the item that had caught his attention, he realized that they were Sakura's. These were the blasted gloves that the maids had told him she insisted that she kept, and that he had seen her use while she healed the wounds of his soldiers. Had she dropped them on purpose, or had these been dropped by mere coincidence? Grasping the gloves firmly in his hand, he once again mounted his horse, ready to continue his pursuit. It didn't seem like they had rode for much longer because Sakura heard her captors slow their horses down, the animals grunting and huffing as they did. It had given her just enough time come up with some sort of an idea. At a minimum, she was going to put up resistance. Here's good, one of the men voiced. Honestly, with a whole forest, no one is going to comb it that thoroughly, and that's if anyone even bothers to come looking. Don't you think that we could have just a little fun before having to do the hard part? Another asked. Sakura did not like the tone in his voice. It sent shivers down her spine. Yeah, another one agreed. We almost never get any time for that with such a hard ass for a general. The men snickered. I can't believe that she's been passed out this long. She's way too easy. Well, get her weak off the horse. It would be way more fun if she was awake to enjoy the things we do to her. Sakura could hear footsteps approaching. Rampant fear was coursing through her body, knowing what could happen. Her mind and body screamed for escape, just any way out of this situation as she willed it to calm down. She had to think rationally. Just a little more, a few more seconds and the wait would be over and she would put her plan into motion. She could a presence closing in on her, and the moment that she felt the slightest touch she growled, throwing her head back as hard and as fast as she could. A sharp pain immediately rang through her skull, along with the pained scream from the male behind her. You bitch, he cursed, stumbling backwards. This was her chance. She used the momentum from her headbutt to land herself on her feet, taking off as soon as she felt the earth beneath them. Shit, get her, another one screamed. Sakura could hear their loud footprints pursuing her, and the clank of metal. She had to go faster. She had to escape. This was her only chance. It was short-lived, however, as a rough hand grabbed her arm, yanking her mercilessly back as one of the males threw her to the cold hard earth. Sakura began to scream, despite the fact that the tie around her face muffled the sound. It was a natural reaction. She tried to push away, desperately reaching to try and get up to run again, but the male forced her to the ground, pinning her with her face to the dirt. Somehow it's always more exciting when they resist, he taunted. Sakura could feel herself easily being overpowered, tears beginning to form in the corners of her eyes as the gravity and fear of her situation, the helplessness that she was beginning to feel sinking in. They would take every bit of dignity she had before throwing her away like trash. Was this the way her life was going to end? She had to fight. She refused to be helpless. Whoa, hey dude, one of the male voices sounded, almost in disbelief. We weren't really sir. Shut up. What does it matter to you what I do to this bitch? Exclamation mark quote. The man on top of her spat back. Silence. The other men did nothing to defend her. Sakura screamed, desperately thrashing in an attempt to break free. However, her petite slim frame and strength seemed no match for the man on top of her as he grasped her arms in a binding grip that she was sure would cause bruises. Almost as if it was no challenge, he flipped her around onto her back. It was dark and she couldn't see the details of his face. Sakura didn't stop screaming. How could those other men stand there and pretend like this wasn't happening? The man on top of her weaseled his way between her legs, one arm pinning her binded hands above her. Sakura was sobbing with her screams. His other hand wrestled her legs down. Suddenly the glow of red caught her eye. What do you think you're doing? A menacing voice snarled, startling all of them. Sakura was hysterical at this point, but she immediately knew who the man was. Daring to look over, she felt the familiarity of his haunting eyes. Sir. This little bitch was trying to escape. We caught her but he was abruptly cut off. I'm going to ask you one more time. The voice demanded, low and threatening. What do you think you are doing? Sakura could hear the man who was on top of her audibly gulp and he scrambled off of her. She watched as Sasuke's dark figure inched closer, and the other figures begin to step backwards in fear. I told you. We found. Sato, shut up. Suddenly the sharp high-pitched ring of metal being ripped from its sheath sounded through the air as Sakura saw the reflection of Sasuke's sword rip through the throat of one of the men. The remaining three let out a whimper of fear, their natural reactions demanding they retreat, as if their fear was palpable. Sakura clenched her eyes shut as the terrified sounds of men screaming in metal rendering their flesh rang through the air, the scent of fresh blood invading her nose. Men like you have no place in this world. Sasuke snarled as he took their lives without a second thought, without hesitation, their lifeless bodies falling to the earth like heavyweight. Though it felt much longer than it took, Sakura couldn't help but realize that she felt a small amount of relief. Sasuke had come for her after all. Silence filled their air for a moment after the last man was slain, before Sakura heard footsteps resume, coming towards her. In response, she slowly opened her viridian eyes, daring to see Sasuke. His eyes were still glowing an angry crimson red, and Sakura found herself mesmerized by them as if she would be okay being sent to the depths of hell in their gaze. Without a word, he grabbed her, albeit a little roughly, flipping her over to her front again as he took his sword to swiftly cut the fabric that covered her mouth and bound her arms. "Explain," he demanded, his voice angry and sharp. He was still just as threatening, just as demon-like as Sakura knew him to be. She shivered at his voice. For the first time since she had met this man, her defiant and challenging nature had shrunken away. She had been terrified at the thought of that man forcing himself on her, and no one coming to her aid, not even the ones who were willing to stand there and let it happen. Sakura stumbled, knowing that Sasuke likely did not have the patience for her inability to give him an answer. She was waiting for him to display his irritation at her, but what caught off guard when all she was met with was an agitated, frustrated grunt. "Sakura," Sasuke growled, the strain of bringing himself under control evident. "I'm sorry." Sakura couldn't stop herself as she broke out into a sob. It didn't matter how much she didn't want to cry, didn't want to be weak, her body was doing it on its own. She just wanted to lock these feelings, this fear, away. Push them to the farthest corners of her mind. "Give me a reason why I shouldn't believe them and end your life," Sasuke demanded, indifference still in his voice. He still held his sword as if he could strike and kill any second. Sakura found herself somewhat confused at his distrust towards her, despite the fact that he had slain those men without so much as allowing them any words of explanation. Why would he bother killing them and letting her live if he had so much distrust towards her? What would be the point? "Go ahead, Sasuke. Do it then," Sakura angrily sobbed, daring to glare at the Uchiha general. "It would be more merciful and less pitiful than begging you for my life." His crimson eyes glared back into her viridian ones, as if contemplating her dare. He said nothing in response, however she could hear him rip off his black hooded coat, tossing it to her as he let out an angry, frustrated growl. "Put that on," he sneered, as he turned away, sheathing his sword. He gave a sharp whistle, and Sakura could hear what sounded like the thumping of hooves headed their way. Her eyes still couldn't see that well in the darkness, however, in the moonlight she saw a beautiful pure black horse come to Sasuke's call. Sakura did as he said, throwing on the black coat and closing the fasten around her neck. The coat almost drowned her much smaller and petite form considering that it had been made to fit Sasuke's. For a moment she had to marvel at the black horse as it gave its greeting to its master. Sakura couldn't help but think that the horse was dark and alluring, much like Sasuke. How alike they were. "Do not speak a word of this to anyone." Sakura could only find herself giving him a small nod indicating that she understood him as she watched him effortlessly mount the black majestic animal as he reached down to Sakura, offering her his hand as his crimson eyes studied her. For a moment, Sakura was unsure of whether to take it. If she took his hand, how much further would he consume her? How much further would she fall into the deep, dark pit of the forbidden longing she was beginning to feel for Sasuke? Sasuke's eyes burned. He had used his Sharingan for much too long looking for that damn woman. They did not speak a word to each other as they rode back to the castle in the dead of the night, the sound of his mare Nyx's hooves thundering against the ground the only thing from keeping the forest from being eerily silent. He had used Amaterasu to burn those men's bodies into nothing once they left, something he would not allow Sakura to see. He wanted to no evidence of their existence left. They did not deserve such a thing. He had indeed found them not longer after they had stopped, camouflaging himself in the shadows as he observed what was going on. He needed to in order to confirm his assumptions and intervene at the right time. He watched her attempt to struggle, he watched her determination to escape, but the sight of that man on top of Sakura, the tears that streamed down her face and look of terror and helplessness that was strewn on her face had been eternally ingrained into his mind thanks to the curse of his eyes. He did not know why, but it had angered him in a way that he did not and could not understand. He understood death, he understood duty, he understood loyalty, but he did not understand why he felt shame in allowing such a thing to happen. In that moment, he wanted to fiercely protect Sakura from it, and it made him angry. Before he had even managed to arrive at the scene, he had already pieced together enough information to know that this whole thing had not been Sakura's fault, and that she had been a victim. The fact that those men suddenly accused her of trying to run away and pretend that they were doing the right thing by capturing her was already absurd to him at that point. The false excuses only fueled his anger. However, despite the mounting evidence against them, the tiniest voice of doubt always clouded Sasuke's mind, making him ask the what-if question. He had slain those men without so much as a warning, without so much as a second to consider their excuses, and he felt no remorse in doing so. The what-it question left Sakura under his scrutiny, and his way of thinking, his way of doing things demanded that he put her under suspicion as well. He still could not trust her, despite the fact that deep down he already knew the answers. For the first time since he had met that pink-haired, viridian-eyed woman, she did not have that defiant, challenging tone to her eyes that he found enticing. No, they had been filled with terror and resentment tonight. In fact, she had almost resigned herself to it, and it made Sasuke furious. Furious at himself that he had waited so long to deal with the problem. Despite the fact that he felt turmoil, he had still be cold towards her in the end. Sasuke knew that Sakura would have bruises that decorated her skin tomorrow, and that she would not be able to tell a single person about it. Though it was a silly thought that he immediately dismissed. If she could mend ripped-apart gaping wounds, she could definitely heal a few bruises. When they finally arrived back at the castle, he swiftly guided her inside, hoping the black coat would shield her from any possible and prying eyes thought it was the very early hours of the morning. She returned his cloak to him, mumbling a thanks, though she avoided any eye contact in doing so before walking off in the direction of the maid's quarters without another word or look at him. There was a tight knot in his chest, though he ignored it as he watched her back shrink with the distance she put between them. Shortly after, he decided to return to his bedchambers to try and calm his burning eyes. He would need a good night's rest if he had any hope of them recovering to where he was no longer uncomfortable, but something told him that he was not going to sleep well that night. All he could think about was what had happened, and how he could prevent such a thing from happening again. He would be logical and methodical about it. The fact that he had soldiers that were willing to do such horrible things made him hate the fact that there were Uchiha was no honor. Uchiha held honor in high regard. He had always been a man of honor, no matter how cruel he could be. Second, Sakura's abilities made her both valuable and a target. He needed her to keep healing the soldiers in their army, but he also needed a better way to safeguard her as an asset, and that meant that perhaps she should know at least the basics of defending herself. For a moment Sasuke's mind wandered off to the thought of her petite and small frame making any sort of defense training possibly useless, remembering how tiny she had felt against him when he had pulled her up to sit in front of him on Nyx to bring her back. It was almost like she had belonged there, and Sasuke didn't find himself hating it.